films to watch. Let's all go to the movies. Let's all go to the movies. Let's all go to the movies and get some films to watch. Wow, hey, I got a film for you. This is a film that comes right out of the heart of that period when that kind of song was really rife on the drive-in screen. 1952, we're right in the Cold War period. We're just out of some really heavy stuff out of World War II, Korean Wars, things like that. What we got with you tonight is a film called Invasion USA. This is a kind of a interesting film. Okay, it reminded me of a lot of basically some science fiction films that kind of deal with the same thing. Invaders from Mars reminds me of that. Reminds me of War of the Worlds. Reminds me of just a whole slew of films that were done in the science fiction context about invasions from outer space. But in this case, it's not invasions from outer space. Now, you know that in those other stories, a lot of historians talk about that those films about invasions from outer space were sort of metaphors for, well, our fear of the Red Menace, communist invasion. Well, this film, Invasion USA, delivers on just that. This film deals with the communists, the Ruskies. In this case, it's the Reds. They come down through Alaska and they invade the United States. And not only do they invade the USA with troops, conventional troops, that come parachuting down dressed like Americans. Oh, those Ruskies. But, likewise, they use atom bombs. Matter of fact, there are so many atom bombs that are ignited in this film, you'd think the world would have been incinerated very quickly. Now, the premise for this film is kind of interesting, okay? How are you going to deal with invasion and stuff? Well, you have these guys who all kind of, out of different walks of life. You have a guy he calls himself a cattle raiser. Now, I've heard of cattle ranchers, but this guy, you ask him, what do you do? I'm a cattle raiser. I wonder how far off the ground he raises those babies. But the whole thing is that we got a cattle raiser, we got a guy who's a reporter, we got a woman who's sort of a chanteuse, we got a guy who makes tractors, okay? And they're all at a bar. And they're watching television. It reminds me of a Star Trek episode. You know, in Star Trek, the original series, very often they're sitting on the ship there, and the whole thing takes place on the screen up there. It's like, oh, you know, we come on this show on Star Trek to watch another show on TV up here, and that's what they're doing. They watch this big screen television, and what comes on this big screen television is invasion. And we follow all the footage through basically watching a lot of television footage through these reporters and things like that. And they really go wild, man. They really take over the United States. Now, I don't want to get too far into that because, gosh, I'm not really even sure how far I should go into this because I don't want to ruin your viewing expectations and satisfaction that you're going to get out of this. But it's true. Invasion USA. There's some interesting people in this film as well. Peggy Castle. She appears in this. Okay, you've seen her in some science fiction films along the line, The Day the World Ended, things like that. You got Gerald Moore, who's in The Angry Red Planet. You've got Dan O'Hillery, who's also plays Mr. Omen. Mr. Omen is kind of a cool guy. He's a fortune teller hypnotist who's sitting at the bar with these guys, and he gets them to look into this goblet of brandy or something like that he's drinking, and they get entranced. Remember that, the entrancement with that goblet there, because that's sort of a key to this film. Film is directed by a guy named Alfred Green. He was a regular working out of Warner Brothers during the 30s and things, and during the end of his career, and this really is nearer to the end of his career, he got into a lot of B productions and doing television work. I was reading a story about him that he was so riven with arthritis by this time that he would never really leave the director's chair. I mean, they put him in his chair and he stayed there for the whole shoot. So we kind of had to feel for him while this is going on. And as a matter of fact, it kind of fits this film because these guys in these bar stools, they never move either. They just sort of are plastered, doubly, okay? And they're sort of plastered there in front of the television sets. Now, I'll tell you one thing. One thing this film really taught me was that if there is an invasion from another country, there is at least one occupation that is going to thrive. Bartenders. Bartenders are going to make money hand over fist while this is going on, because everybody else's jobs just go to hell in a handbasket. Okay, television studios get blown up. New York gets blown up in this thing real good like. It's almost like a Godzilla type of thing, but instead you got nuclear wars. Now I'll tell you, I kind of prefer the metaphoric way because I can think about this. When I see it on screen, I'm kind of saying, I don't know. But it's got kind of a Twilight Zone-y type of feel, so I think you're going to enjoy this movie. Invasion USA. And our print is pretty good of this film, isn't it, Smokey?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it's a very good print. If you like A-bomb films, if you like the philosophical debate, what is your position on the universal draft? Because they talk about the universal draft, and I was wondering about that. It's at a bar, and I thought they were talking about beers, universal draft. But it has something else. It has something to do with whether they're going to draft women and men to fight in the army. And what's the key message of this film is this idea that, hey, we want everything as Americans, but nobody's willing to sacrifice. Well, this film kind of plays out that little fairy tale issue. And I think you're going to have fun with it. Invasion USA 1952. Up. We got this breaking news breaking in here. Let's see. Love the show. Great job keeping Smokey off the air. Ah! Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Smokey's got something to say about that. Say, okay. So, hey, what do you think of that? But I was watching and had one question. Are those Reds owned by Marge Schott? Oh! I'm not certain about that, but I'm still debating the whole issue. Something we have to research. The Reds, they didn't do too well this year. They're glad we are of that. Okay. Roll 'em, Smokey.